Chapter 1. The Fall. I do not remember the noise. That is the first mercy the war granted me, and likely the last. I remember the mud. It had been freezing for weeks, a hard gray crust that broke your boots and froze your toes black. But when I woke up, the mud was warm. It was wet and cloying, pressing against my cheek like a feverish hand. It took me a long time to realize why the earth had changed temperature. It was soaking in blood. Not just mine, but the blood of the men who had been standing next to me. I tried to push myself up to find my rifle to find the line. My hand sank into the mire. I looked down. There was a crater where the squad leader had been. Smoke curled up from it, smelling of sulfur and cooked meat. I tried to stand. That was a mistake. My body gave a lurch, a spasm of panic that didn't translate into motion. I looked further down. My right boot was gone. The shin was gone. There was only a ragged mess of cauterized flesh and shattered bones steaming in the cold air. I stared at it. It didn't look like part of me. It looked like a piece of dropped meat from a butcher's counter. I didn't scream. The shock was a heavy blanket weighing down my lungs. "Medic," I said. My voice was small, swallowed by the roar of the artillery barrage continuing in the distance. I tried again, forcing air through a throat that tasted of copper and ash. "Medic." A figure appeared above me. He was silhouetted against the gray sky, his white helmet stained brown and red. The caduceus symbol on his shoulder was barely visible under layers of filth. I reached out a hand. I expected comfort. I expected a reassuring grip, a promise that I would be pulled back to safety, patched up, and sent home with a medal. You expect these things because they tell you these things in the Schola. They tell you that every servant of the Emperor is precious. The medic did not take my hand. He grabbed my collar. He twisted the fabric of my flak jacket tight against my throat, cutting off my breath for a second, and he began to drag me. He didn't check my eyes for pupil dilation. He didn't speak a word of encouragement. He hauled me backward through the sludge like a sack of grain. My ruined leg trailed behind, bumping over rocks and debris. The pain hadn't arrived yet, just a sickening vibration that rattled my teeth. "My leg!" I gasped, clawing at his wrist. "Wait, my leg!" "Quiet," the medic snapped. His voice was distorted by the grill of his respirator. It wasn't angry, it was bored. "Conserve oxygen. Keep the wetware fresh." Wetware? I didn't know the word then. I thought it was code. I thought it was a medical term for blood volume or shock levels. I didn't know it was an inventory classification. I was no longer Trooper Kalen. I was biological hardware that needed to be kept at a viable temperature for processing. He dragged me over the lip of the trench and into the waiting maw of a Valkyrie transport. The engine screamed a high-pitched whine that drilled into my skull. The hold of the ship was dark. It smelled of old sweat, iodine, and fear. He threw me onto the metal deck. I slid on something slick, oil or blood, I couldn't tell. There were others there, dozens of them. Men and women from my regiment stacked in rows. Some were groaning, some were silent. I landed next to a boy. I recognized a kid from 3rd Platoon who used to play the harmonica. His face was gone. A bandage was wrapped hastily around his head, soaked through with red. He was making a low, bubbling sound. The medic didn't stay. He turned back to the ramp, back to the battlefield to fetch more. I was alone in the dark, surrounded by the broken pieces of the Emperor's hammer. I tried to find a comfortable position, but every movement sent a jolt of nausea through my stomach. I looked at the stump of my leg again. The bleeding had stopped, seared shut by the heat of the blast. It looked alien. The ramp began to rise. The sliver of gray light from the outside world narrowed. I watched it disappear with a strange sense of finality. As the hydraulic locks hissed shut, sealing us in the gloom, a red emergency light flickered on overhead. It bathed us all in the color of a fresh wound. The engines roared louder, lifting us away from the mud, away from the shelling. I closed my eyes. A wave of relief washed over me, powerful and intoxicating. I was off the line. I was injured, yes, crippled perhaps, but I was in the care of the Imperial Guard's medical corps. They had retrieved me. They hadn't left me to die in the mud. Surely that meant I mattered. Surely that meant there was a plan for me. "The Emperor protects," I whispered to the darkness. It was a prayer I had said 1,000 times, but never with such conviction. I felt the ship bank taking us toward the rear lines, toward hospitals, clean sheets and cybernetics. I imagined a mechanical leg, shiny and chrome. I would walk again. I would serve again. The vibration of the hull lulled me. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold exhaustion. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know that the destination wasn't a hospital, but a sorting facility. I didn't know that mercy had nothing to do with why they picked me up. I drifted into the darkness, holding on to that single foolish thought. I was saved. Chapter 2. The triage. The landing ramp didn't lower gently. It slammed down with the weight of a coffin lid opening. Light flooded the hold, but it wasn't the warm glow of a sanctuary. It was the harsh, sodium yellow glare of floodlights, humming with a frequency that made my teeth ache. We were dragged out not onto a hospital ward with sterile tiles, but onto a vast ferrocrete deck. The space was cavernous, a hangar bay the size of a city block, filled with the echoing screams of 10,000 dying men. The air was thick enough to taste a soup of promethium fuel antiseptic and the copper tang of fresh blood. They laid us out in rows, endless straight rows. There were no beds, just the cold floor marked with painted yellow lines. I was placed between a guardsman who was missing his jaw and a woman who was simply staring at the ceiling, her hands clutching a rosary that had snapped in half. Servitors, mindless half-mechanical drones, shuffled between the lines. They carried buckets of water and sponges, but they weren't cleaning wounds. They were wiping the floor, scrubbing away the blood so the officers wouldn't slip. It was my first lesson in the priorities of this place. Order came before survival. I waited. Time became fluid. The pain in my leg had dulled to a throbbing, distant heat, kept at bay by whatever stimulants were in my blood. I watched the process. It was efficient. Too efficient. A team of medici moved down the line ahead of me. They weren't treating anyone. They were tagging. Green one shouted, slapping an adhesive strip onto a man's chest. "Flesh wound. Return to unit within 12 hours. Red, the next one said. He didn't slap a tag. He made a hand signal to a trooper standing behind him. There was a soft thwip sound, a suppressed pistol shot. The wounded man next to the tagged soldier went limp. Two servitors immediately stepped in, grabbed the heels of the corpse, and dragged it toward a chute in the wall labeled Biomatter Reclamation. I stopped breathing. I stared at the spot where the man had been. There was no prayer, no last rites, just a decision made in a second, followed by a disposal. Red means death, I realized. Red means you are too broken to fix. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at my leg. It was gone below the knee. Was that enough for a red tag? Was a leg worth the cost of a bolter shell? Or was I just waste? A shadow fell over me. It wasn't a medicae. It was a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus. He was a towering figure draped in crimson robes that trailed in the filth on the floor. He didn't walk. He glided, propelled by unseen mechadendrites beneath his hem. His face was a mask of brass and glass, with a green optical sensor cycling where a nose should have been. He smelled of old oil and ozone. He didn't speak to me. He didn't ask where it hurt. He extended a metal claw, tipping my chin up to look at my eyes. A beam of red light scanned my retinas. It was blinding. Subject: 734, Kalen the priest buzzed. His voice was synthetic, a grind of static and code. Genetic stock prime, skeletal density within acceptable tolerances, neural pathways intact. He wasn't assessing my health. He was assessing my parts. He moved the scanner down my body, ignoring the missing leg entirely, focusing instead on the width of my shoulders and the integrity of my spine. It felt like being a car on a lift, inspected for salvageable scrap. Please, I whispered the word, escaping before I could stop it. I can still fight. Don't give me red. I can shoot, I can... The priest ignored me. He produced a slate, his metal fingers tapping out a rhythm that sounded like hail on a tin roof. He paused, the green eye whirring as it focused on my chest. Category designated, he intoned. He reached into a pouch at his belt. I flinched, expecting the pistol. I expected the dark. Instead, he pulled out a tag. It wasn't green. It wasn't red. It was white. He slapped it onto my armor. It stuck there, stark and bright against the grime. White. What was white? I looked around frantically. I saw greens limping away. I saw reds being dragged to the chutes, but I didn't see any other whites nearby. Priority transfer, the priest said to a floating skull drone hovering over his shoulder. Prep for aggressive modification. Relief flooded me so potent it made me dizzy. Priority. That sounded good. That meant special care. That meant they had a plan for me. I wasn't trash. I wasn't just meat for the grinder. I was special. I looked at the tech priest with something approaching gratitude. Thank you, I breathed. Thank you, my lord. He didn't acknowledge me. He was already moving to the next body. As he drifted away, a servitor stepped forward with a syringe gun. It pressed the cold metal nozzle against my neck. There was a hiss of compressed air. Sleep, the servitor monotoned. The darkness came rushing in from the edges of my vision. It was heavy and absolute. Just before my eyes closed, I heard a voice from the row behind me, a veteran with a bandaged face who had been watching. White. He wheezed, his voice filled with a pity that chilled me more than the cold floor. Oh, throne. Poor bastard. White is for recycling. But the drug was too fast. I couldn't ask him what he meant. The world tilted, spun, and vanished. I fell into the black, clutching my white tag like a ticket to salvation. Chapter 3. The Living Crypt. I woke up to the sound of humming. It wasn't a gentle sound. It was a low, throbbing vibration that I could feel in the metal frame of the bed beneath me. It sounded like the engine room of a starship, vast and tireless. I opened my eyes, expecting the bright lights of a recovery ward. Instead, I saw a metal grate directly above my face, perhaps only 2 feet away. Through the mesh, I could see the bottom of another mattress and the dark stain of fluids leaking through it. I turned my head to the left, then to the right. The view was the same. Rows and columns of bunks stacked floor to ceiling, stretching out into a gloom that swallowed the walls. It looked less like a hospital and more like a crypt for the living. I tried to sit up to get a better look, but my body refused to follow the command. It wasn't paralysis this time. It was leather. Thick industrial straps bound my chest, my arms, and my remaining leg to the cot. Panic flared hot and sudden. Prisoners are tied down. Madmen are tied down. Soldiers of the guard are treated with dignity. I tugged at the restraints, the leather creaking against the metal frame. Hey, I croaked. My throat was dry as sand. Is anyone there? Why am I tied up? There was no answer from a nurse or a doctor. Instead, a small object descended from the shadows above. It was a servo skull, a human cranium fitted with anti-grav motors and dangling optical sensors. It hovered at my eye level, its singular red lens twisting to focus on me. A mechanical claw extended from its base, holding a long, rusted needle. I flinched, pressing my head back into the thin pillow. "Wait," I gasped. "I don't need sedation. I need water." The skull didn't pause. It jammed the needle into my neck with the precision of a machine and the empathy of a stone. A cold fluid rushed into my veins. Nutrient Cycle administered it, chirped in a tinny voice, then floated away to the bunk above me. The drug didn't make me sleep. It just dulled the edges of the panic, turning my fear into a heavy, wet blanket. I looked to my left again. The bunk next to me was occupied. It was Jackson. I recognized the tattoo of the aquila on his forearm, though now it was marred by a deep laceration. He was awake, staring straight up at the underside of the bunk above him. But he wasn't looking. He couldn't. Where his eyes should have been, there were only 2 smooth patches of gray bioplastic sealed shut. They hadn't bandaged him. They had caulked him like you would seal a leaking pipe. "Jackson," I whispered. The silence in the room was heavy despite the machinery. It felt dangerous to break it. "Jackson, it's Kalen." He didn't turn his head. His lips barely moved. "Don't speak so loud," he murmured. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of inflection. "The sensors pick up decibel spikes. They come if you make noise." "Where are we?" I asked, straining against the straps again. "Why did they take your eyes?" "They didn't take them," Jackson said. He sounded like he was reciting a manual. "They were damaged. Inefficient. They removed the obstruction." He paused, a long, terrible pause. "My hands are tied too. Kalen, can you feel it? The cold." I could feel it. The air was frigid, kept just above freezing. It wasn't for comfort. It was to slow down bacterial growth and decay. We weren't patients recovering in a warm bed. We were meat in a locker being preserved until the butcher was ready. I looked around the vast, dim dormitory. There were thousands of us here. I should have heard moans of pain cries from mothers, prayers to the Emperor. But there was only the hum of the ventilation and the click of the servo skulls. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the peace of healing. It was the quiet of a graveyard waiting to be filled. "It's quiet," I whispered. "No." Jackson replied, and for a second, his voice cracked with a human tremor. "It's not quiet. They just cut the vocal cords of the loud ones." Chapter 4, The Menu. Time lost its meaning in the dark. There was no day or night, only the cycle of the nutrient injections and the hum of the ventilation units. I lay there, staring at the rusted mesh above me, listening to the rhythmic clicking of metal feet on the grating. It was the sound of authority approaching. It wasn't the heavy boot of a commissar or the soft tread of a nurse. It was the shuffling, scratching gait of administration. A figure stopped at the foot of my bunk. He was an adept of the administratum, a scribe in gray robes stained with ink and grease. He held a slate in his hands, a glowing bio-slate that cast a sickly green light onto his face. He didn't look at me. He looked at the data scrolling across the screen. "Subject 734, he muttered. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't check my wristband. He knew who I was because the bed told him. He reached out a hand. His fingers were long and stained with soot, the nails yellow and thick. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't place a hand on my forehead to check for fever. Instead, he produced a pair of brass calipers from his belt. He opened them with a snick and pressed the cold metal points against my temples. He squeezed. Cranial circumference 58 centimeters. He droned, tapping the stylus against the slate. Click, tap, click, tap. The sound was deafening in the quiet. Frontal lobe density nominal. No signs of fracture or deformation. He moved the calipers down to my jaw, forcing my mouth open not to check my throat, but to measure the hinge of the bone. I tried to pull away, but the straps held me fast. "Please," I rasped. "My leg. The pain is getting worse. I think the infection is spreading." The adept didn't pause. He moved the calipers to my shoulders, measuring the width of my clavicles. Shoulder span broad, he noted his voice devoid of interest. Spinal column integrity verified. Capacity for load bearing high. He wasn't examining a patient. He was measuring a chassis. I realized with a jolt of nausea that he hadn't looked at my missing leg once. He didn't care about what was lost. He was only interested in what remained and whether it was sturdy enough to carry weight. "Why are you measuring my shoulders?" I asked. Panic beginning to rise again, pushing against the drug-induced haze. "I'm a marksman. I need my eyes and my hands. Why does my shoulder width matter?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were watery and pale, rimmed with red. They were the eyes of a man who had read numbers for 50 years and forgotten the people behind them. "Visual acuity is secondary," he said. "Targeting logic can be outsourced to the cogitator banks. Skeletal durability is the primary resource here." He tapped the screen again. "Classification beta grade frame, suitable for heavy munitions mounting." He wasn't talking about giving me a gun. He was talking about mounting something on me. He marked a final checkbox on his slate. The green light blinked once accepting the input. He turned to leave the assessment complete. I struggled against the leather, the raw nerves in my stump screaming. "Wait," I cried out. "At least give me something for the pain." "It feels like fire." The adept paused. He didn't turn back. "Pain indicates that the central nervous system is responsive," he said simply. "It confirms the connection quality is high. Be grateful for the pain, 734. It is the only reason you are not in the incinerator." He walked away, the click-tap of his stylus fading into the gloom. I lay back, the cold sweat pooling at the base of my neck. I understood then. I wasn't a soldier waiting for healing. I was raw material. I was a collection of spare parts, a spine, a skull, a rib cage being cataloged for reuse. And on his slate, I wasn't listed as a casualty. I was listed as inventory. Chapter 5. The fever dream. The pain changed. It stopped being a sharp, localized scream in my leg and became a dull, oppressive heat that filled the entire world. I closed my eyes, but the heat followed me. It pulled me down through the metal mattress, through the deck of the ship, dropping me into a soft, golden haze. I wasn't in the triage bay anymore. I was standing in the high grass of Avernus. The sun was warm on my face. Real sun, not the flickering loom strips of the ship. I could smell the harvest, the sweet scent of grain dust and heated soil. I looked down. My boots were whole. My legs were strong. I took a step, and the ground was firm, not slick with oil. "Kaelin," a voice called. It was soft, carried on the wind. I turned. My mother was standing by the gate of our HAB unit. She was wiping her hands on her apron, smiling the way she did when the shift whistle blew. "Kaelin, come inside. It's time for dinner." I felt a smile crack my face, a sensation so alien it hurt. "I'm coming," I shouted. I started to run. The wind whipped past my ears, but it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like static. Hiss. Click. I ignored it. I ran faster, my boots thudding against the earth. But the earth felt hard, metallic. I reached the gate, breathless. "I'm here," I said. "I'm home." My mother looked up. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. In fact, she didn't have eyes. Where the blue irises should have been, there were twin optical sensors glowing with a harsh crimson light. The apron she wore wasn't linen. It was a heavy rubber sheet stained with grease. The skin of her face began to peel back, revealing brass gears churning beneath the cheekbones. "Dinner is inefficient," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It was a synthesized grind, layered with the sound of grinding metal. Caloric intake unnecessary. Maintenance cycle initiated. The golden wheat fields behind her withered in an instant, turning into rusted rebar and twisted pipes, jutting from a desolate gray plain. The sun turned black. "Mother," I whispered, backing away. "What's wrong with your face?" She didn't answer. She reached out her hand, elongating into a pneumatic claw. "Comply," she screeched, the sound tearing through the dream like a siren. "Comply, comply." The ground beneath me opened up, not soil, but a grate, and I fell. I fell past the harvest, past the house, into a deep, dark well of oil. I woke up screaming, but no sound came out. My throat was too dry, pasted shut with thirst. I was back in the crypt. The red emergency lights were pulsing in time with the throbbing of my stump. I was shivering violently, my teeth chattering against each other. The heat of the fever had broken, leaving me freezing in a sweat that felt like ice water. I lay there, gasping for air, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. I felt something wet slide down my cheek. I tried to wipe it away, but my hands were still strapped down. It tickled as it ran into my ear. A tear. I hadn't cried when my leg was blown off. I hadn't cried when the medic dragged me. But I cried now. Not because of the pain, but because the dream had felt so real, and the waking world felt like the nightmare. The tear was cold. It felt like a leak from a machine, not sorrow from a man. "Home," I whispered, testing the word. It tasted like ash. "There is no home." The silence of the ward swallowed the words. I let the cold tear dry on my skin. I didn't blink again. I was afraid of what I would see if I closed my eyes. Chapter 6, The Promise. The lights dimmed to a low amber glow. It was the ship's version of Night Cycle, a simulation of rest for bodies that were not allowed to sleep. The silence was heavier now. The machinery seemed to breathe slower. I turned my head on the thin pillow, the leather strap chafing against my neck. I needed to hear a human voice. I needed to know that I wasn't the only thing left alive in this metal tomb. I looked at Jackson. He was staring at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling in a perfect mechanical rhythm. "Jackson," I whispered. "Are you awake?" He didn't blink. He couldn't blink with those sealed sockets, but his head turned slightly a millimeter of acknowledgement. "Awake," he replied. The word came out flat. It didn't sound like a question or a statement. It sounded like a status report. "Energy conservation mode active." "Stop talking like that," I hissed. I felt a spike of irritation cut through my fear. "We're soldiers, not servitors. We're going to get out of here." They gave me a white tag. That means priority. Maybe they'll fix your eyes too. Maybe they have bionics. "Correction," Jackson said. His voice was smooth, stripping away the rough accent of our home world. "White is not priority. White is blank. White is a canvas waiting for paint." He paused. "We will be fine, Kalen. Efficiency is a form of survival." I shivered. It wasn't the cold air this time. It was him. He sounded like he had already made a deal with the machine. I looked away from him down at the IV tube snakes into my arm. A new bag had been hung while I slept. The fluid inside wasn't the clear saline of hydration or the pink tint of painkillers. It was a murky, viscous yellow. It moved slowly down the tube like syrup. I focused on the sensation in my leg. I expected the itch of knitting flesh, the sharp sting of nerves reconnecting. That is what healing feels like. But I didn't feel that. I felt a strange, sickening softness. The jagged edge of my shin bone, which had been throbbing for days, felt like it was turning into clay. It was a dissolving sensation, as if the bone was losing its structure, melting into a pliable jelly. I strained my eyes to read the label on the bag. The text was small, printed in high Gothic block letters. Osteomollifier, Grade 4. Mollifier, I whispered. My stomach dropped. That's not medicine. That's a solvent. They aren't fixing the bone. They're softening it, Why would you soften a bone? You soften metal to reshape it. You soften clay to mold it. You don't soften a man's leg unless you plan to shove something into the marrow that doesn't belong there. Jackson, I choked out. The fluid. They're melting my bones. Preparation, Jackson said. He didn't turn his head this time. Structural integration requires pliability. Do not resist. Above us, a red light flared. It wasn't an alarm. It was a summons. The locking mechanism on the wheels of my bed disengaged with a loud clack. The bed jolted. It began to move on its own, pulled by a magnetic track in the floor. I was sliding backward away from Jackson, away from the dormitory. Help me, I shouted, the panic finally breaking through the drugs. Jackson. They're taking me. It is time. Jackson's voice drifted back to me, fading into the hum of the engines. Be useful. Unit 734. The doors at the end of the ward hissed open. I rolled into the corridor. The darkness swallowed me. The promise of healing was gone. The modification had begun. Chapter 7. The first cut. The room did not smell of antiseptic. It smelled of grease ozone and singed meat. The air was hotter here, stifling and dry. My gurney locked into place beneath a canopy of dangling instruments. There were no doctors in white coats. There were only mechadendrites, long segmented metal tentacles hanging from the ceiling like vines in a steel jungle. A nozzle descended, hissing like a serpent, and pressed against my neck. I expected the cold rush of anesthesia, the black void of sleep. Instead, I felt a heavy stone-like weight spread instantly through my limbs. My fingers stopped twitching. My chest rose and fell in a shallow, forced rhythm. I tried to close my eyes, but the eyelids wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, frozen, but I was wide awake. I could see everything. I could feel the cold metal against my back. I was trapped behind the glass of my own eyes. A new arm descended from the ceiling. It didn't hold a scalpel. It held a rotary saw, the circular blade gleaming under the harsh halogen lights. It spun up with a sound that wasn't a roar, but a high-pitched scream that vibrated in the fillings of my teeth. It was the sound of industry, not medicine. I wanted to thrash. I wanted to beg. But my mouth hung slack, a useless cave. The blade lowered. I watched it approach my leg, the one that was already ruined, the one I had hoped they would save. It touched the skin just above the knee. There was no pain. The nerve blockers had done their work. Instead, there was a violent vibration. It traveled up my thigh, through my hip, and rattled the base of my skull. It felt like I was holding a jackhammer against my own bone. I saw the spray of red mist paint the plastic sheeting around the bed. I smelled the friction, the sick, sweet scent of bone turning to dust, and marrow cooking from the heat of the friction. It was intimate and violating. They were cutting through me like I was a piece of timber in a mill. The vibration changed pitch as the blade bit through the tibia, a deeper grinding shudder that shook my entire skeleton. The saw lifted, whining down. A metal claw swooped in, grasping the severed limb. I watched, unable to look away, as the machine lifted my own leg into the air. It dripped, a macabre trophy. For a second, I recognized the boot, the scuffed leather, the mud from the battlefield still clinging to the sole. That was me. That was part of who I was. The claw swung to the left and opened. My leg tumbled into a dark chute in the wall. There was no ceremony, no burial, just the dull thud of meat hitting a disposal bin. Amputation complete, a synthesized voice announced from the ceiling. Prepare socket for hardware integration. I stared at the empty space where my leg had been. I felt a phantom itch, a ghost of a toe wiggling in the void. I wanted to pass out. I prayed to the Emperor to let the shock take me. But the chemicals in my blood kept me anchored, wide awake, forcing me to witness the dismantling of his servant. I wasn't dying. I was being renovated. Chapter 8. Forced Adaptation. The paralysis faded slowly, retreating like a tide of cold water. I tried to sit up. My body felt different. Heavier. Off balance. I looked down at my right thigh. The stump wasn't bandaged, it was capped. A dull gray metal socket had been hammered into the marrow of my femur. The skin around it was pulled tight, stapled directly into the steel. There was no inflammation, no redness. The flesh had simply accepted the intrusion. It looked like the port of a fuel tank. I touched it. It was cold. I couldn't feel my fingers on the metal, but I could feel the pressure deep inside my hip, a dull ache where the bone met the bolt. I wasn't healing. I was being retrofitted. I tried to swallow, but my throat was blocked. I gagged, reaching up to claw at my neck. My fingers brushed against a ribbed plastic tube that vanished into my mouth. It wasn't a temporary intubation. It was fused. I could feel the scar tissue where they had anchored it to my jawbone. I tried to rip it out, but pain exploded behind my eyes, a sharp electric warning. I stopped. The tube pulsed, pumping a warm, flavorless slurry directly into my stomach. I didn't need to eat anymore. I didn't need to taste. The pleasure of a hot meal, the comfort of a ration bar gone. I was a combustion engine, and this was my fuel line. A sound came from the bed opposite mine, a shuffling of heavy feet. Jackson was standing there. He was swaying slightly like a tree in a breeze. Jackson. I tried to call his name. The sound that came out was a wet, strangulated moan. The tube stole the shape of the words. Jackson turned. The caulked sockets where his eyes used to be seemed to stare right through me. But it was his arms that made my blood run cold. They were gone, cut off at the elbows. In their place were two massive rotating ball joints gleaming with oil. They weren't hands, they were mounts, hard points waiting for a weapon to be slotted in. Jackson, I gurgled again, tears prickling my eyes. Can you hear me? He didn't answer. He raised his stumps. The ball joint spun with a soft whir, rotating 360 degrees. It was a calibration test. He wasn't waving. He was checking his range of motion. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His tongue had been removed. In its place was a speaker grill currently silent. He lowered his arms and turned away, shuffling back to his designated spot. He wasn't my friend anymore. He was a chassis undergoing systems checks, and I was just the spare parts in the next bin over. Chapter 9, Quality Control. The room buzzed. It was a physical sensation, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up and the air taste of copper pennies. They didn't strap me down this time. They didn't need to. I was seated in a metal chair bolted to the deck, and a tech priest was threading thick, insulated cables into the ports they had drilled into my spine. I could feel the connectors locking into place, a sickening click-click-click that echoed inside my skull. It felt like someone was tapping on the vertebrae with a wrench. The priest didn't speak to me. He was muttering a binary chant to the machine spirit of the console in front of him. He was calibrating a tool, and I was the tool. Neural circuit A7. Integrity. Check, the priest rasped. He threw a switch. My body exploded. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of motion. My right arm, the one that was still flesh and bone, snapped up into a rigid salute. The movement was so violent and sudden that I heard the shoulder joint pop. Pain flared hot and white, but I couldn't lower the arm. I tried to pull it down. I tried to relax the muscle, but it was like trying to stop a falling rock with a thought. My brain was screaming down, but my arm was listening to the wire in my spine. It stayed locked in the air, trembling with the voltage running through the nerves. I stared at my own hand betraying me. It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the switch on the console. Response time, Sutios, 0.04 seconds. Excellent, the priest noted, adjusting a dial, increasing voltage. Testing lower locomotive clusters. He didn't warn me. A surge of electricity hammered into the metal socket in my hip. My stump jerked upward, kicking at the empty air. It thrashed rhythmically, a grotesque mimicry of marching. Thump, thump, thump. The metal socket banged against the chair frame, denting the steel, but the movement didn't stop. I wasn't doing this. I was just the passenger trapped inside a meat puppet that was dancing to someone else's tune. I tried to scream to beg him to stop, but the tube in my throat choked the sound into a wet gurgle. Subject exhibits high-grade conductivity, the priest said, turning to a scribe who was logging the data. He sounded pleased in the way a mechanic is pleased when an engine starts on the first turn. The flesh is weak, but it is obedient. Note that for the file. Obedience is the only virtue that matters. He cut the power. My arm dropped like a stone, hitting the armrest with a bruise-forming thud. My legs stopped kicking, leaving only the echo of the impact ringing in the room. I slumped in the chair, gasping for air through the tube sweat stinging my eyes. I realized then that the chains and straps were unnecessary. They didn't need to tie me up to control me. They had rewired the house. They could turn me on and off like a light switch. And the terrifying part wasn't the pain. It was how responsive I had been. My body wanted to obey the machine more than it wanted to obey me. Prepare for Phase 2, the priest ordered, reaching for another switch. Let us see how much amperage the heart can withstand before it stutters. I sat there limp and broken, waiting for the lightning to strike again. I was no longer a soldier. I was a circuit, and the switch was about to be thrown. Chapter 10. Jackson's fate. The lights in the ward never truly turned off. They just dimmed to the color of dried blood. It was in this half-light that I heard it. It wasn't the hum of the ventilation or the distant thrum of the ship's engines. It was a wet, grinding sound. Word chunk. Word chunk. It sounded like a carpenter boring a hole through wet wood. It was coming from the bed next to mine. I turned my head slowly, fighting the stiffness in my neck. The privacy screen between our beds had been left slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see Jackson. He was sitting upright, strapped to a metal chair that had been wheeled to his bedside. He wasn't moving. Standing over him was a dark shape, a servitor with a surgical array for a hand. It wasn't treating a wound. It was positioning a long spiral drill bit against Jackson's temple. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw something. But the fear was a physical weight on my chest, pressing the air out of my lungs. I watched the shadow on the wall. The servitor didn't hesitate. It engaged the drill. The sound rose in pitch, a muffled whine, as the metal bit through skin and bone. Jackson didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He just sat there, his mouth slightly open, drool pooling on his chin, while the machine bored into his brain. They weren't killing him. They were curating him. They were carving out the parts of his mind that felt fear or hope or loyalty to a friend, leaving only the parts that could pull a trigger. The drill retracted with a sickening squelch. A thin stream of dark fluid ran down the side of Jackson's face. I stared at his eyes, those sealed, caulked sockets. For a moment he slumped forward, the strings of his consciousness cut. He looked like a puppet whose master had dropped the controls. He's gone, I thought. Jackson is gone. That's a corpse in a chair. Then he moved. It wasn't a human movement. It was a snap. His spine straightened with the violent precision of a hydraulic piston. His head jerked up, facing directly at me. The caulking over his eye sockets split open. There were no eyes underneath. There were lenses. Glowing, burning red lenses that cycled through a focus check. Click whir. Click whir. Jackson, I whispered, though I knew it was a mistake. The thing that had been Jackson turned its head. The speaker grill where his mouth used to be crackled with static. A voice came out, but it wasn't the voice of the boy who played the harmonica. It was a flat, synthesized monotone. Subject 733, online. Diagnostics green, previous identity deleted. The red lenses bored into me devoid of recognition. He didn't know me. He didn't know his name. The drill had taken it all. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing the darkness would take me too. But the sound of his cooling fan spinning up filled the silence. Jackson was dead. The machine in the bed next to me was just waiting for orders. Chapter 11, The Crawl. I waited until the red lenses of the thing that used to be Jackson dimmed to a standby cycle. The silence in the ward returned heavy and suffocating, but now it felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was watching me. I looked at the tubes running into my arm, and the feeding line fused to my throat. They were leashes. I grabbed the IV line with my left hand, the one that still had fingers. I didn't hesitate. I yanked. The needle tore free with a spray of yellow fluid and a sharp bite of pain, but I didn't care. The feeding tube was harder. It was anchored deep. I tugged at it, gagging, tasting blood and bile, but it held fast. I would have to drag the pump with me. I rolled to the edge of the bed. The drop was only 3 feet, but to a man with one leg and half a soul, it looked like a canyon. I let gravity take me. I hit the floor with a wet slap, the impact jarring my stump so hard I saw white spots dance in the dark. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle the scream. I lay there for a moment listening. No alarms, no rushing footsteps, just the hum. I was beneath notice. I was just a piece of inventory that had fallen off the shelf. I began to crawl. I dug my elbows into the cold grating of the floor and pulled. My remaining boot scrapped for purchase, pushing me forward inch by inch. I dragged my ruined body past the rows of sleepers, past Jackson, past the open door. The corridor outside was vast and dimly lit by flickering lumen strips. It stretched on forever, a tunnel of riveted steel and pipes. I expected to see guards. I expected to see signs for an exit or an escape pod. Instead, I saw the racks. The walls were lined with them, floor to ceiling. They were filled with clear vacuum-sealed bags. I pulled myself closer to one, squinting in the gloom. It wasn't rations. It wasn't ammo. It was arms. Left arms. Right arms. Some muscular, some thin, all pale and bloodless, floating in preservation gel. The next rack held eyes. Thousands of them staring blindly out of jars. The hallway wasn't a thoroughfare. It was a parts department. I kept moving, the bile rising in my throat. I had to find a way out. I had to find a radio, a weapon, anything. I dragged myself around a corner and saw a heavy blast door with a small circular viewport. Light, I thought. Starlight. If I could see the stars, I could figure out where we were. I pulled myself up the side of the door, my muscles trembling with exhaustion. I pressed my face to the thick glass. I didn't see a planet. I didn't see a friendly fleet. I saw the void. It was blacker than anything I had ever imagined, a vast, indifferent emptiness that stretched on forever. And floating in it, miles away, was another ship, a massive cathedral of Gothic spires and gun decks. It was dumping something. A continuous stream of debris was venting from its side, glittering in the distant starlight. Bodies. It was dumping bodies. The ones with the red tags. "Oh God, Emperor," I sobbed, sliding down the door. "We're in the middle of nowhere." A soft hum made me look up. A servo skull hovered inches from my face, its lens rotating. It didn't sound an alarm. It spoke with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. "Patient 734, it chirped. "You are outside your designated zone. Wandering is inefficient." I looked at it. I didn't have the strength to fight. I didn't even have a hand free to swat it away. "Where is the exit?" I whispered. "How do I get out?" "There is no exit," the skull replied. "This is a manufactorum. You are not a passenger. You are a component." It extended a small pincer, and clamped onto my hospital gown. It began to pull gently, but inexorably dragging me back toward the darkness I had just escaped. I didn't resist. There was nowhere to go. The vacuum outside was cold, but the machine inside was colder. Chapter 12. Meeting the Maker. They didn't take me back to the ward. The servo skull, joined by 2 heavy loader servitors, dragged me deeper into the ship. We passed through blast doors that hissed like angry snakes, entering a sector where the air tasted different. It wasn't the stale, recycled air of the dormitory. It smelled of ozone-heavy incense and the sterile cold of a laboratory. The floor changed from grating to polished black marble, slick and seamless. I was thrown forward, sliding across the surface until I hit the base of a dais. I gasped, clutching my ribs, and looked up. The room was a cathedral of anatomy. Hololiths floated in the air, displaying rotating schematics of lungs, hearts, and nervous systems. But the centerpiece was the figure standing before a massive cogitator bank. It was the Magos Biologus. He was less a man than a monument to industry. He was suspended from a rail system in the ceiling, his robes billowing around a cluster of mechadendrites that twitched and coiled like metal vipers. He didn't have legs. His torso ended in a mess of cables and anti-grav generators. He turned to face me, his multifaceted eyes cycling through spectrums of light. Subject 734, the Magos boomed. His voice didn't come from a mouth. It resonated from speakers embedded in the walls surrounding me. You display a distressing surplus of initiative. Wandering is a variable I did not account for in your conditioning. I pulled myself up onto my elbows. I was exhausted, bleeding and terrified, but a spark of the man I used to be flickered in the dark. I was a soldier of the Astra Militarum. I had held the line at Cadia. I deserved better than to be dismantled like a faulty toaster. Kill me, I croaked. My voice was rough, scraping against the feeding tube. I am Trooper Kalen of the 8th Cadian. I have served the Emperor. I have given my leg. If I cannot fight, then give me the Emperor's peace. Put a bolt in my head and be done with it. The Magos drifted closer, the hum of his suspensor fields vibrating in my chest. He extended a manipulator arm, tipping my face up with a cold steel pincer. He studied me, not with anger, but with a profound, terrifying curiosity. Peace, he asked, the word sounding alien in his synthesis. You ask for oblivion when I offer you eternity. That is the logic of meat. Short-sighted. Flawed. He released me, drifting back to his screens. You cling to this concept of Kalen. You think Kalen is valuable, but Kalen is weak. Kalen feels pain. Kalen requires sleep. Kalen hesitates. He gestured to a large hologram floating above us. It showed a human skeleton, but it was reinforced with steel struts. The arms were gone, replaced by massive rotary cannons. The skull was encased in a targeting helm. It was a monster. It was a walking tank. This, the Magos said. His voice dropping to a reverent whisper, is Unit 734. It does not fear death. It does not miss. It does not tire. Freedom is chaos, Trooper. It is a terrifying disorder. Service, true unwavering service, is order. I looked at the blueprint. I saw the empty space where the brain should be replaced by a cogitator bank. I saw the ammunition hoppers fused to the ribcage. It wasn't a suit of armor. It was a tomb. Please, I wept, the fight draining out of me. I don't want to be a machine. I just want to die. The Magos turned away, dismissing my soul with a wave of his metal hand. Waste is a sin against the Omnissiah, he stated, turning back to his work. And I do not sin. Prepare him for the final integration. Stop crying, Thor. You will be beautiful when you are armored. Chapter 13. The wipe. The pain of the body was gone, replaced by a cold, singing pressure inside my skull. I was strapped into a reclined chair, my head clamped in a vise of brass and leather. They didn't need to restrain my arms or legs anymore. They had turned those off at the spinal port. I was a head on a stick, a mind trapped in a disconnected cockpit. The Magos did not stand over me. He was at a console across the room, his back turned, typing commands that I felt as physical blows. Every keystroke sent a spike of white noise through my optic nerves. It wasn't sound. It was the taste of aluminum foil and the smell of burning hair. Neural architecture mapped, the speakers announced. Initiating formatting sequence. Deleting non-essential biographical data. I tried to close my eyes, but my eyelids were pinned open by metal retractors. A probe slid into the port they had bored behind my ear. It felt like a knitting needle made of ice, pushing deep into the gray matter. The room dissolved. The lab, the Magos, the smells of oil and blood, they all vanished into a blizzard of static. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was inside the machine. A picture flashed in the static. It was vivid, more real than the darkness around me. It was the mess hall on the transport ship. I was sitting with Jackson playing cards. He was laughing, holding a winning hand. I could smell the wreck calf and the cheap tobacco. File corrupted, a voice thundered in my head. It wasn't my voice, it was the system. Delete. No, I screamed in the silence of my mind. That's my friend. That's who I am. Confirm deletion. The image of Jackson caught fire. It didn't burn with heat, it burned with pixels. His face distorted, turning into a blocky mess of gray squares. The laughter twisted into a digital screech. Then it was gone. Just white space. I searched for the memory, reaching out with a phantom hand, but there was nothing there. I couldn't remember his name. I knew I had a friend, but the word was empty. It was just a label on a missing file. The static swirled again. A new image formed. Avernus, the wheat fields, my mother standing on the porch, the sun catching the gray streaks in her hair. She was calling me for supper. This was the core. This was the anchor. If I lost this, I lost everything. I tried to grab the memory, to pull it down deep into the lizard part of my brain, where the machine couldn't reach. I tried to hide her behind the instinct to breathe. Detecting anomaly. The voice droned. Emotional attachment identified. Purge. Please, I begged. Let me keep her. Just this one thing. I'll do whatever you want. I'll be a gun. I'll be a tank. Just let me keep my mother. The sky in the memory turned the color of television static. The wheat fields dissolved into lines of binary code. My mother's face began to blur. I tried to focus on her eyes to memorize the shade of blue, but the color was bleaching out, turning to gray. Overriding sector, 7G, writing new protocol target acquisition. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of my name, the sound of a heavy bolter firing came out. Thud, thud, thud. Her image shattered like glass. The shards spun away into the dark, and with them went the feeling of warmth. I felt a hole open up in my chest, a vast, windy canyon where a person used to be. The static cleared. I was back in the room. The probe withdrew from my skull with a wet schluck. The Magos turned around, his green eye whirring. Formatting complete, he said. State designation. I opened my mouth. I looked for the name, Kalen. I knew it had been there a moment ago. I checked the shelves of my mind, but they were bare. There was no farm, no mother, no Jackson. There was only the mission. There was only the code. Designation, I rasped my voice, sounding strange and distant. Unit. Unit. 734. And your purpose? To serve the Omnissiah. To purge the weak. Excellent, the Magos said. The software is installed. Now we build the casing. Chapter 14. The assembly. I was moving again. Not crawling, not walking, but hanging. Large, rusted hooks had been driven through the meat of my shoulders, suspending me from an overhead track. I drifted through the air like a side of beef in a slaughterhouse, my feet dangling inches above the conveyor belts below. The silence of the laboratory was gone, replaced by a deafening industrial roar. Pistons hissed, hammers slammed, and sparks cascaded from the ceiling like distinct burning rain. This was the manufactorum. This was where the flesh ended and the machine began. I looked down at my body. It looked pale and small against the massive machinery surrounding me. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching someone else being carried to the altar. The track halted with a metallic shudder. I swung slightly, the hooks grating against my collarbones. A team of servitors descended upon me. They didn't have hands. They had torches and wrenches. One of them grabbed my right arm, the good one, the one I used to salute officers with. It twisted the limb. I felt the shoulder joint dislocate with a wet pop. I didn't scream. The nerve blockers made it feel like a dull thud, distant and muffled. A laser cutter flared to life, bright and blinding. They didn't amputate surgically this time. They just burned through the elbow, cauterizing as they cut. The forearm dropped to the floor, discarded among the metal shavings. I watched it fall. It looked like trash. Before the smoke cleared, a crane lowered a massive, blocky object from the darkness above. It was a heavy bolter, a weapon meant to be mounted on a tank or a tripod. It was enormous, smelling of gun oil and sacred unguents. The servitors guided it onto the stump of my arm. Metal rods were hammered into the marrow of my humerus to anchor the weight. Cables were threaded through my armpit, splicing the trigger mechanism directly into my radial nerve. I felt a sudden crushing weight on my right side. I wasn't holding the gun. I was the gun. If I thought fire, the barrels would spin. The distinction between my will and the weapon's action had been erased. The modification continued. A tube was shoved through my abdominal wall, connecting a massive ammunition hopper on my back, directly to the weapon on my arm. The heat of the ammo feed would warm my guts. The vibration of the firing mechanism would shake my spine. Then came the faceplate. A servitor with a delicate spider-like manipulator plucked my right eye from its socket. It was a casual motion, like removing a stone from a fruit. In its place, a multi-spectrum targeting lens was screwed into the orbital bone. The world on my right side turned into a stream of red data distance wind speed thermal signatures. I blinked with my left eye, seeing the grime of the factory. I blinked with my right eye, seeing target vectors. Finally, the armor. It wasn't strapped on. Plates of ceramite were pressed against my chest and legs. I smelled the acrid scent of burning skins as they spot-welded the metal directly to the subdermal studs they had implanted earlier. The heat was intense, cooking the sweat on my skin. They were sealing me in. I realized with a dawn of horror that there were no clasps, no buckles. I could never take this off. I would never feel the wind on my skin again. I would never take a shower. I would rot inside this shell until the day I died. The welding torch hissed one last time, sealing the chest plate. I was no longer a man wearing gear. I was a tank made of meat. Chapter 15, Boot Sequence, Darkness. It was not the darkness of sleep, nor the darkness of a closed room. It was the absolute static-filled void of a system in standby mode. I was aware of existence, but only as a series of potential energy readings. I was standing. I knew this not because I felt the floor, but because my internal gyroscopes reported a vertical orientation. My knees were locked with hydraulic pressure clamps. I did not breathe. A filtration unit cycled oxygenated fluid through my lungs, removing the need for the expansion and contraction of the chest. It was efficient. It was silent. I waited. I did not know what I was waiting for, only that the command to act had not yet been received. Around me, I detected the electromagnetic signatures of others. Unit 730 through Unit 733. We were racked in the cold shoulder to shoulder, like rifles in an armory. Light flooded the bay. It was sudden and harsh, triggering an automatic aperture adjustment in my right optical lens. A figure moved down the line. It was a tech priest, his red robe swaying with the mechanical rhythm of his gait. He held a staff of office, the cog-shaped head crackling with power. He stopped in front of me. I watched him through a filter of scrolling data. I did not recognize him as a superior officer or a medical professional. I recognized him as an input terminal. He did not look at my face. He looked at the serial number etched into the ceramite plating of my chest. Unit 734, the priest intoned his voice, a burst of binary static that bypassed my ears and registered directly in my auditory cortex. Ritual of awakening initiated. Praise the machine god. He struck my chest plate with his staff. A surge of voltage hammered into my core. My reactor flared to life. A heat spread through my chest cavity, not the warmth of blood, but the searing burn of a promethium fuel cell igniting. My systems came online in a cascade of green text scrolling across my vision. Hydraulics optimal. Targeting calibrated. Ammunition 5,000 rounds. Pain receptors severed. A small vestigial part of my brain, a scrap of gray matter that remembered the smell of mud and the taste of bread, tried to rise up. It tried to scream. It tried to mourn the loss of the hands that used to hold a rifle. But the scream hit the firewall of the conditioning. The system flagged it immediately. Alert cognitive dissonance detected. Source organic. Memory. Cluster. Action. The cursor blinked in my mind. The choice was not mine. The logic engine made it for me. Action purge. The scream vanished. The memory of the mud evaporated, replaced by a stream of tactical topographical data. The ghost in the machine was silenced, crushed under the weight of the code. I felt a sense of profound clarity. The confusion of being human was gone. The fear of death was gone. There was only the objective. Unit 734, the priest commanded, pointing his staff toward the open blast doors where the thunder of a distant war zone echoed. Status. My vocal processor engaged. It felt cold and precise, vibrating against the metal collar fused to my throat. System online, I replied. The voice was deep synthesized and perfect. Emotions null. Directive serve. The heavy bolter on my right arm spun up, the barrels rotating with a hungry whine. I took a step forward. The deck plate shuddered under the weight of my step. I was no longer Kalen. I was a weapon of the Imperium, and I was ready to fire. Chapter 16. New deployment. The drop pod slammed into the earth with a force that would have shattered my human spine. Now it merely registered as a kinetic impact on my internal gyroscope, easily compensated for by the hydraulic stabilizers in my legs. The ramp hissed open, revealing a square of gray sky and driving rain. I stepped out. The mud was deep, a churning slurry of earth and water, exactly like the field where Kalen had died. But Unit 734 did not struggle. My steel feet sank into the mire, finding purchase on the bedrock below. I did not feel the cold seeping into my boots. I did not shiver. My internal thermometer noted the ambient temperature as 4 degrees Celsius, irrelevant data. I marched forward, the servos in my knees, whining with a sound that was lost in the roar of the wind. The battlefield was a chaotic tapestry of thermal signatures. To my left, I detected the heat blooms of last fire. To my right, the burning wreckage of a chimera transport. I did not feel fear. Fear is a biological response to the anticipation of pain or death, and I had been cured of both. I scanned the horizon. My targeting logic highlighted enemies in crisp, red outlines, calculating distance, windage, and armor thickness in a microsecond. I raised my right arm. The heavy bolter was heavy. A burden that would have exhausted a man in minutes, but to me it was weightless. It was simply an extension of my will. Engaging my vocal synthesizer announced flatly. I depressed the trigger. The weapon roared, bucking against the recoil dampeners fused to my shoulder. I watched the explosive rounds traverse the distance. There was no glory in the kill, and no revulsion. A cluster of traitor guardsmen disintegrated behind a crumbling wall. My ammunition counter ticked down. 4980 rounds remaining. I adjusted my aim. The vibration of the gun rattled my chest plate, a comforting rhythmic thud that resonated with the reactor humming in my core. I walked through the incoming fire. Last bolts struck my ceramite plating, leaving scorch marks that my damage control systems categorized as cosmetic. I was a walking fortress. I was invincible. Then the mortar shell hit. It landed 20 meters to my front, throwing up a geyser of wet earth and shrapnel. I did not flinch. I merely recalculated my path. But as the smoke cleared, I saw him. A trooper from the support squad had been blown onto his back. He was young, his face smeared with mud, his helmet lost in the blast. He was trying to crawl, dragging himself through the slime. His left leg was a ruin of blood and bone trailing uselessly behind him. He looked up, his eyes wide and white in the gloom. He looked at me. Alert visual match detected. My systems froze. For the first time since my awakening, the smooth stream of data stuttered. The image of the boy overlaid perfectly with a corrupted file deep in my memory banks. I saw the mud. I saw the fear. I felt a phantom sensation, the warmth of blood on a freezing day, the smell of cooked meat. "Medic!" the boy screamed. The sound did not just hit my audio receptors, it pierced the firewall. My finger froze on the trigger. The heavy bolter spun down. A warning light flashed on my hood error. Memory leak. Sector 734K, rebooting logic gate. For half a second, the machine slept, and the man woke up. I looked at the boy, and I didn't see a variable. I saw myself. I wanted to tell him to run. I wanted to tell him that the rescue was a lie, that the silence of the grave was better than the noise of the factory. I wanted to scream. System override engaged. The command slammed down like a hammer. The red text of the error message was swept away by the scrolling green of the mission protocol. The ghost was shoved back into the box. The hesitation vanished. I was Unit 734. I had a job to do. I stepped forward, the ground shaking under my tread. The boy reached out a hand, his face twisted in a desperate hope. "Help me," he sobbed. "Please, Emperor, help me." I reached down with my left hand, the metal claw that replaced my fingers. I grabbed him by the strap of his flak vest. I lifted him effortlessly, ignoring his cry of pain, as the movement jostled his shattered leg. I turned back toward the landing zone, toward the waiting maw of the Valkyrie transport. I began to drag him. Subject acquired, I broadcasted to the command network. Biomass viable for salvage. He was crying, thanking me, babbling about how he was saved. He didn't know. He thought I was a guardian angel encased in steel. He couldn't hear the calculations running in my head, measuring his cranial circumference and his shoulder width. He didn't know that I wasn't taking him to a hospital. I was taking him to the assembly line. I dragged him through the mud, his boots bumping over the rocks. The rain washed the blood from my armor. The war would continue. It always did. That final pause, that split-second glitch in Unit 734's targeting system. Do you think it was just a system error? Or was Kalen's soul trying to break through the programming? Let me know your theory in the comments below.